My name is Isabella Thorne, and I'm 34 years old. For most of my life, I was what my family affectionately called the artistic one, which was their polite way of saying the disappointing one, the one who stubbornly refused to follow the respectable, predictable path they had laid out. I'm a painter, and for years that word felt more like a confession than a profession. I never imagined that the very passion my family despised would become the instrument of my liberation, or that their grandest social affair would set the stage for the most spectacular and public vindication I could have ever dreamed of. They threw me out, you see, for choosing a canvas over a career, but they had no idea that while they were planning my sister's extravagant wedding, I was painting my masterpiece, a secret that would unravel their world right in the center of their perfectly manicured lawn. Before I reveal how a single painting sold for a fortune and turned their world completely upside down, I'd love to know where all of you are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated or had someone doubt your dreams, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe to join this incredible community of people who understand that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being counted out. It all came to a head on a Tuesday, a painfully ordinary gray Tuesday that would become the stark dividing line in my life, before and after. I was 33 at the time, living in the attic room of my parents' sprawling Tudor-style home, a space they generously dubbed my studio. It was large enough, I suppose, with a slanted ceiling and a single dormer window that looked out over the manicured gardens, but the air was always thick with the unspoken scent of their disapproval. It smelled faintly of lavender potpourri and my father's disappointment. I'd just finished a piece, a swirling abstract of blues and grays that felt like the emotional landscape of my existence in that house. I was cleaning my brushes, the rhythmic scrape against the glass jar a small, familiar comfort, when my father appeared in the doorway. Richard Thorne was a man built of sharp angles and even sharper opinions, a senior partner at a prestigious law firm who measured the world in billable hours and stock portfolios. He didn't knock. He never did. "Isabella," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. He surveyed the room, his gaze flicking over the stacked canvases leaning against the wall, the splattered drop cloths, the easel standing like a silent accomplice in the center of the room. His lip curled just slightly, a micro-expression of contempt I knew better than my own reflection. "We need to talk." My mother, Eleanor, hovered behind him, a fragile shadow in a cashmere sweater set, her hands clutching each other at her waist as if holding herself together. She was the diplomat, the one who softened my father's edicts, but her diplomacy always served his agenda. "What's wrong?" I asked, my own voice sounding small in the sudden, tense silence. I placed the brush down, wiping my turpentine-stained hands on a rag. "What's wrong?" my father repeated, stepping into the room. "Is this," he gestured vaguely at my life's work, "this hobby, this delusion? You are 33 years old. Your sister is engaged to a wonderful young man, a surgeon. She's building a life. What are you building, Isabella? A collection of dust-gathering canvases that nobody will ever buy." Each word was a precisely aimed dart. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, a tide of shame and anger. "It's not a hobby, Dad. It's my career," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I'd said them so many times they'd lost all meaning, even to me. "A career pays for a mortgage, Isabella. A career comes with a 401k and health insurance. It doesn't come with paint under its fingernails and the smell of chemicals," he shot back. "I have secured you an interview. A proper one. It's an entry-level paralegal position at Stratton, Finch and Gable. It's respectable. It's a start." He said the word respectable, as if it were a holy sacrament. My mother nodded encouragingly from the doorway. "It's a wonderful opportunity, dear. All your friends have such stable jobs." My heart sank. A paralegal. Me, in a world of beige cubicles and paper cuts, my soul slowly suffocating under stacks of legal briefs. The thought was so horrifying it was almost comical. "I'm not going," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm a painter. I can't just stop." My father's face hardened, the last vestige of feigned paternal concern vanishing. This was the ultimatum. I knew it. Then you can be a painter somewhere else, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. This house is for contributing members of this family. It is not a bohemian flophouse. Either you go to that interview on Friday, or you find another place to live. Your mother and I are done subsidizing this fantasy. I looked at my mother, a desperate, silent plea in my eyes. Say something. Defend me. She just looked down at her clasped hands, her silence a louder condemnation than my father's words. Standing just behind her in the hallway, I saw my younger sister, Chloe. She had her phone in her hand, probably texting her fiancé, a brilliant smile still lingering on her face from whatever she was reading. She glanced up, caught my eye, and her smile faltered into a look of vague, uncomfortable pity before she quickly looked away and retreated down the stairs. That was the moment that broke me, not my father's cruelty, but my mother's cowardice and my sister's casual indifference. In their world, I was a problem to be solved, an embarrassment to be managed. I didn't wait until Friday. That night, under the cold, indifferent light of the moon, I packed 2 suitcases and a large portfolio case with my best work. I didn't have much, but it was mine. I left the large abstract of blues and grays, the one I had just finished, leaning against the easel, a silent, final statement. As I crept down the grand staircase, my father's voice drifted from the living room. He was on the phone, laughing. Yes, the wedding is going to be something else, he boomed. Chloe deserves the best, of course. We're pulling out all the stops. The cost of her happiness, I realized, was my exile. I slipped out the heavy oak door without a sound, the click of the latch sealing the end of my life as Isabella Thorne, the daughter, and marking the beginning of a desperate, terrifying new chapter. The city swallowed me whole. I found a tiny 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that real estate agents would charitably call up and coming. It had a radiator that hissed like a cornered snake and a window that looked out onto a symphony of brick walls and fire escapes. The entire apartment was smaller than my old studio, and it perpetually smelled of damp and my downstairs neighbor's curry. But it was mine. The freedom was exhilarating and utterly terrifying. My savings, a paltry sum squirreled away from the few commissions I'd managed to get over the years, dwindled at an alarming rate. I ate ramen noodles until the salt made my tongue feel swollen. I watered down my gesso to make it last longer. I painted on cheap canvas board instead of stretched linen. Every day was a battle against the gnawing voice in my head, a voice that sounded remarkably like my father's, telling me I was a fool, that I had failed, that I should just give up and crawl back. Some days it was almost overwhelming. I would sit on the lumpy mattress that served as my bed and sofa, staring at a blank canvas, my mind as empty and white as its surface. The rejection was relentless. I sent digital portfolios to dozens of galleries. Most didn't reply. The few that did sent form letters, polite but firm dismissals that all said the same thing in different fonts. Your work, while promising, is not a fit for our current collection. It was a soul-crushing litany of no. I started to believe them. Maybe my father was right. Maybe I was just deluding myself. The vibrant colors on my palette seemed to mock me, their potential a stark contrast to my own dwindling hope. My only lifeline in that sea of despair was Marcus. I'd known Marcus since art school. He was a sculptor, a brilliant one, but he'd traded the uncertainty of a creative career for the stability of running a small bespoke framing shop. The shop was his sanctuary, a dusty, wonderful place that smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. It was where I went when the silence of my apartment became too loud. Marcus was the complete opposite of my family. He was warm, perpetually covered in a fine layer of wood dust, and he looked at my paintings, not as a liability, but as a miracle. He would squint at a new piece, tilt his head and say something like, "Izzy, the way you handled the light in this corner, it's breathtaking." He never said I should get a real job. He believed my job was real. One particularly bleak afternoon, I shuffled into his shop, a fresh rejection email, burning a hole in my phone's screen. "That's it," I announced, slumping onto a stool. I'm done. I'm going to go apply for a job as a barista. At least then I'll be able to afford coffee instead of just smelling it. Marcus stopped sanding a piece of maple wood and looked at me, his kind eyes serious. Don't you dare, he said. The problem isn't your work, Izzy. You know that. The problem is the game. The art world is all about who you know, who your parents are, what gallery you're with. It's a closed loop. You're an outsider, so they're not even looking at the paintings. He was right. My name, Isabella Thorne, was associated with a prominent lawyer, not with the gritty, authentic art scene they curated. I was an unknown quantity from the wrong side of the tracks, socially speaking. He picked up a rag and began wiping down the frame, his movements thoughtful. So if they won't let Isabella Thorne in the front door, he said slowly, a spark igniting in his eyes, maybe someone else has to sneak in the back. I looked at him, confused. What are you talking about? You need a new identity, he said, his voice gaining excitement. A persona, someone with no baggage, no connections to the Thorne family, someone mysterious, someone they can't easily define or dismiss. He started pacing around the small shop, growing more animated. We'll build a myth, an artist who is reclusive, who only communicates through an agent, someone from, I don't know, somewhere cool and remote. Iceland? The Swiss Alps? The idea was so insane, so audacious, that I laughed. A hollow, tired sound. Marcus, that's crazy. I can't just invent a person. Why not? He challenged, stopping in front of me. What do you have to lose? You're already eating ramen every night. We create a new name, a new story. We build a website, super minimalist, very chic. We create an Instagram account, but we only post extreme close-ups. A brushstroke here, a texture there. We never show the full piece. We create scarcity, intrigue. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We make them come to you. The apathetic fog in my brain began to thin. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited. A new name, a new story. What name? I whispered. He grinned. Well, that's the easy part. It's been staring us in the face the whole time. He picked up a charcoal pencil and wrote on a scrap of wood. ILA. Short for Isabella, he said. A secret, hiding in plain sight. And just like that, in a dusty framing shop on a Tuesday afternoon, Ela was born. The birth of Ela was a lifeline. It transformed my despair into a project, a secret rebellion that Marcus and I orchestrated from my tiny apartment. We spent a week crafting her identity. Ela was not from the Swiss Alps. We decided that was too cliché. Instead, we made her a phantom. Her location undisclosed. Her history a deliberate blank. Her biography on the minimalist website we built simply read, Ela paints, that is all you need to know. Marcus, with his natural charm and business sense, became her gruff but protective agent. We set up a new encrypted email address. All communication would go through him. The work I created as Ela was different. Freed from the weight of my own name and my family's expectations, something inside me broke open. I painted with a ferocity I hadn't felt in years. The canvases were no longer just expressions of my sadness. They were acts of defiance. The colors were bolder, the compositions more daring. I poured all the frustration, all the hurt, all the smoldering anger into the paint. I was no longer Isabella Thorne, the disappointing daughter. I was Ela, the anonymous force. Marcus was a brilliant strategist. He identified a handful of influential independent art bloggers, the kind the mainstream art world pretended to ignore, but secretly followed. He sent them an email as a curt, intriguing message with a single high-resolution image of a small section of one of my new paintings. The subject line was simply, a first look. One of them, a notoriously sharp-tongued critic from Berlin named Klaus Richter, took the bait. A week later, he posted a blog titled, Who is Ela? He wrote, in a world saturated with the loud and the self-promoting, a whisper has arrived. I don't know who Ela is, I don't know where they are, but I have seen a corner of one painting, and it contains more truth and raw power than most entire exhibitions. This is not art as commodity, this is art as confession. Find me more. The post went viral in the niche world of contemporary art. Suddenly, the encrypted email inbox was flooded with inquiries. Small online galleries, collectors, other bloggers. Marcus handled it all with masterful aloofness. He agreed to sell 3 small pieces, setting the prices just high enough to be serious, but not outlandish. They sold in minutes. The money was a godsend. It meant I could buy professional-grade canvases, tubes of cobalt blue and cadmium red without wincing at the cost. It meant I could eat a real meal, but more than that, it was proof. Proof that my work had value, my talent was real. It was just my name that had been holding me back. A few months into this clandestine operation, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my apartment, forwarded from my parents' address. It was an invitation, embossed with gold lettering, to the engagement party of my sister Chloe Thorne and Dr. Julian Croft. My stomach twisted. I hadn't spoken to any of them since the night I left. I threw the invitation in the trash, but the thought of them, celebrating, festered like a splinter in my mind. 2 weeks later, curiosity, or perhaps a masochistic impulse, got the better of me. I knew Chloe and my mother had a standing brunch appointment every other Saturday at a small cafe near the country club. I put on a pair of sunglasses and a baseball cap and sat at a table in the back, nursing a single cup of coffee. I saw them come in, my mother looking proud, Chloe glowing with happiness. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough snippets to piece together their conversation. The caterer alone is a fortune, my mother was saying, her brow furrowed with a mixture of delight and anxiety. And your father is insistent on the French champagne, not the Prosecco. Chloe laughed. Daddy wants a wedding that will be the talk of the town for a decade. Well, he's getting it. Eleanor sighed. Frankly, I don't know how we're going to manage it all. Your father's investments haven't performed as well as he'd hoped this year. It's putting us in a rather delicate position. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. But your father has a brilliant idea, my mother said, her voice brightening. We're going to host a charity auction, right at the estate. For the Children's Hospital Foundation, of course. It's wonderful for our image, and it will help with the overheads. A way to get our friends to contribute to the cause, so to speak. She winked. The cause was Chloe's Vera Wang gown and a 6-tier cake. We just need a showstopper, she continued. A main event, something that will get the real money to open their wallets. An idea, dark and audacious, began to form in my mind. A mirror image of the one Marcus and I had cooked up in his shop. It was a terrible, wonderful, terrifying idea. My parents' quest for a showstopper became an obsession. My father, Richard, saw it as a reflection of his own taste and influence. He wanted something that screamed success, an acquisition that would make his rivals at the firm green with envy. I knew this because Chloe, in a surprising and rare act of outreach, had started sending me occasional stilted text messages. They were mostly about the wedding planning, filled with complaints about flower arrangements and seating charts, but they were a tiny crack of connection I wasn't willing to seal up just yet. One text read, "Dad is driving Mom crazy. He's trying to get a Hockney on loan," as if. Meanwhile, the legend of Isla continued to grow. Another online magazine featured a piece on the mystery of Isla, and a gallery in London sold a small diptych for 5 figures, a sum that made me feel dizzy. The art world's fascination was directly proportional to Isla's anonymity. The less they knew, the more they wanted. And it was my mother, Eleanor, who unwittingly brought the two worlds together. During one of her bridge games at the country club, desperate to sound current and culturally aware, she mentioned the enigmatic new artist everyone was talking about. "Oh, you must have heard of Isla," she'd said, fanning her cards. "Terribly exclusive. Apparently, collectors are fighting over the work." She had no idea, of course. To her it was just a name, a piece of social currency. but the seed was planted. A few days later, a formal email landed in the inbox. It was from the acquisitions coordinator of the Thorne Family Charitable Foundation. The letter was pompous and self-important, detailing the upcoming high-profile charity auction for the Children's Hospital, and formally requesting the honor of featuring a new original work by the artist Isla as the centerpiece of the event. It promised unprecedented exposure to a discerning audience of philanthropists and art connoisseurs. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I read it 3 times. Then I called Marcus. "You are not going to believe this," I said, my voice shaking. I forwarded him the email. A long silence followed on the other end of the line. Then a low whistle. "Wow," he said. "Wow. So the chickens have come home to roost in a golden chariot." My first instinct was pure fear. "No," I said immediately. "No way, it's too risky. They'll find out. It's my family, Marcus." The thought of standing in the same room with them, of seeing the looks on their faces, it was paralyzing. This wasn't the plan. The plan was to sell a few pieces online, to get by, to prove I could do it. "Izzy, listen to me," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady, a lighthouse in my panic. "This is better than the plan. Don't you see? This isn't just about proving you can sell a painting. This is about everything. This is them, on their knees, begging for the very thing they threw out of their house. They don't want you, the daughter. They want Isla, the commodity. You have all the power here. You get to write the ending to this story." His words hung in the air. He was right. My fear was the old Isabella talking, the one who flinched and sought approval. Isla wouldn't be afraid. Isla would see the beautiful, brutal poetry of it. So I took a deep breath. "Okay," I said. "Okay, let's reply." Marcus took on the role of Isla's agent with theatrical relish. His email exchanges with my father's foundation were a masterclass in calculated arrogance. He made them wait for days before replying. When he did, the response was brief. "Isla is intrigued but has reservations about the commercial nature of such events." This, of course, only made my father more determined. It became a challenge. The more aloof Marcus was, the more Richard Thorne wanted that painting. It was a negotiation over a prize he thought was for his own glory. But every email was another thread in the web I was weaving around him. Marcus set the terms. They were, by any standard, outrageous. First, the painting by Isla would be the final headlining lot of the auction, no exception. Second, the piece would be delivered in a sealed crate, and was not to be opened or viewed by anyone, including the family, until the moment it was placed on the easel for bidding. This was to preserve the integrity of the artist's vision. Third, the reserve price would be set at a shockingly high figure, ensuring only the most serious bidders would participate. And the final, most crucial condition, Isla's identity was to remain completely anonymous. However, Marcus added a tantalizing clause. If the final hammer price exceeded a certain astronomical amount, the artist might be persuaded to make an appearance. It was the perfect bait. My father, blinded by the potential for social triumph, agreed to everything. He signed the contract, completely unaware that he was agreeing to the terms of his own public unmasking. With the contract signed, a terrifying electric reality set in. I had to create the painting. Not just any painting, but the painting. It had to be a masterpiece, a culmination of everything I had learned, everything I had felt. I bought the largest canvas I could fit up the narrow stairwell of my building. I locked myself in my apartment. For the next month, I lived and breathed this single piece. I called it The Gilded Cage. It fallis, Weiss. It was an abstract, a chaotic symphony of color and texture, but woven into its fabric were the ghosts of my past. I used a palette knife to scrape on thick layers of gold paint, reminiscent of the gaudy frames on the portraits in my parents' home. I mixed a specific cold shade of blue, the exact color of my mother's favorite porcelain vase that she always polished but never used. I dragged a dry brush through wet black paint, creating a pattern that mimicked the wrought iron of the gates at the end of their driveway, the ones that had closed behind me on the night I left. There was a swirling vortex of deep, angry reds and purples in the center, a storm of emotion. But in one corner, almost hidden, was a small, quiet patch of pale green, the color of new leaves on the willow tree that grew outside my childhood bedroom window. It was a sliver of hope, a memory of a time before. The painting was my entire story, my rage, my sorrow, my resilience, all disguised in a language they would never understand. It was the most honest thing I had ever created. When it was finally finished, standing in my small apartment, it felt alive. It pulsed with a raw, kinetic energy. Marcus came to see it and just stood before it for a full 5 minutes without speaking. "Izzy," he finally breathed, "it's a weapon." A week before the auction, he arranged for a professional art handling service to pick it up. 2 men in crisp white gloves arrived with a custom-built crate. They handled it with the reverence reserved for a museum piece. I watched from my window as they loaded it into the truck. I saw the Thorne Family Foundation listed as the destination on the manifest. A part of me, my soul, was on its way back to the house I'd been thrown out of. My father himself supervised its arrival, puffing out his chest as this mysterious, valuable object was carefully carried into his home. I could picture him, directing the movers, feeling immensely proud of the coup he had pulled off, never once suspecting the crate contained his daughter's heart. The night of the auction was a perfect, crisp autumn evening. The air was cool, and the stars were bright, a stark contrast to the churning anxiety in my stomach. A massive, elegantly lit marquee had been erected on the main lawn of my parents' estate, a glowing beacon of their social ambition. Valets in smart red jackets were parking a seemingly endless stream of luxury cars. I arrived in a taxi, my fare paid with money earned by Ela. I wore a simple, sleeveless black dress, something I'd bought from a second-hand store. It was elegant but understated. I wanted to be invisible, a ghost at the feast. As I walked toward the marquee, the familiar sounds of my parents' parties washed over me, the murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes, the soft strains of a string quartet. I presented my ticket at the entrance, a ticket Marcus had secured for me under a false name. The woman at the check-in table smiled brightly, not giving me a second glance. I was just another face in a sea of wealth and influence. Inside, the tent was a vision of my mother's design sensibilities, towering arrangements of white orchids, tables draped in shimmering silver cloths, and waiters balancing trays of champagne and canapés. I saw them almost immediately. My family, holding court near the small stage at the front. My father looked regal in his tuxedo, a broad, self-satisfied smile plastered on his face as he shook hands with a local politician. My mother, shimmering in a sequined gown, laughed a little too loudly at something a woman with an enormous diamond necklace said. And there was Chloe, my sister, looking like a princess in a pale pink dress, her fiancé Julian at her side. She looked beautiful, radiant, and completely absorbed in her own perfect world. I made my way to the bar to get a glass of sparkling water, my hands trembling slightly. As I stood there, my mother swept past, her arm linked with a friend's. She glanced in my direction, her eyes registered my face for a fleeting second, and I saw a flicker of something. Surprise, annoyance. It was gone in an instant. She gave me a curt, tight-lipped nod, a dismissal so profound it was like a physical blow. "Isabella," she murmured, her voice cool, before turning back to her friend. "As I was saying, the bids tonight are going to be astronomical." She hadn't even stopped walking. To them, I was a minor, inconvenient detail, a piece of their past they'd rather forget, had shown up at their glorious present. I gripped my glass, the cold seeping into my fingers, and retreated to a shadowy corner at the back of the tent. I found Marcus leaning against a tent pole, looking wonderfully out of place in his rented suit. He saw me and his worried expression softened into a reassuring smile. He gave me a single sharp nod. Showtime. The auction began. A series of luxury items went under the hammer. A week-long stay at a private villa in Tuscany, a vintage bottle of scotch, a set of diamond earrings donated by a local jeweler. The bidding was spirited, the sums respectable. My father, acting as the master of ceremonies, beamed from the stage. He was in his element, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of his own importance. With each successful sale, the atmosphere in the marquee grew more jubilant, the champagne flowed more freely, and my parents looked more and more triumphant. They were the king and queen of this gilded world, and tonight was their coronation. Finally, the auctioneer, a slick professional with a booming voice, stepped up to the microphone. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing through the suddenly hushed tent, "the moment you have all been waiting for. An item so exclusive, so sought after, that we are honored to present it tonight." A dramatic pause. From the mysterious visionary artist known only as Ayla, we present her latest masterpiece, a work that has never been seen by public eyes until this very moment. I give you The Gilded Cages. Two attendants in white gloves walked onto the stage, carrying a large object draped in a black velvet cloth. They placed it carefully on a heavy wooden easel. The entire tent held its breath. I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat, a frantic, wild drum. My father stood beside the stage, his chest puffed out, the very picture of a proud patron of the arts. He caught my mother's eye and gave her a subtle, triumphant wink. With a theatrical flourish, the auctioneer pulled away the cloth. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was an audible, physical shockwave. The painting dominated the stage, its vibrant, chaotic energy silencing the entire marquee. Under the spotlights, the layers of paint seemed to shift and move. The raw power of it, the sheer, unbridled emotion captured on the canvas, was undeniable. Even from the back of the tent, I could feel its pull. People leaned forward in their seats, their polite party masks replaced by expressions of genuine awe and fascination. "We will open the bidding at $250,000, the auctioneer said, and a nervous titter went through the audience. But a paddle shot up almost immediately. $250,000, the auctioneer cried. Another paddle. 300. A man in the front row, a well-known shipping magnate, raised his. 350. Suddenly, a woman near the side of the stage who had been on her phone the whole night raised her paddle. 500,000, she said calmly. The room buzzed. The shipping magnate scowled and raised his again. 550. The woman on the phone didn't even flinch. 750,000. It was a war. The price climbed at a dizzying, breathtaking pace. 800,000. 900. 1 million. When the bid hit 7 figures, a roar went through the crowd. My father's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. He was practically vibrating with joy. This was beyond his wildest dreams. The money, the prestige, the sheer social victory, it was all his. The woman on the phone, clearly representing a major collector, was relentless. The shipping magnate finally threw his hands up in defeat when the bid reached $1.4 million. $1.4 million, the auctioneer boomed. "Do I hear 1.5? Going once, going twice." He looked at the woman on the phone. She gave a slight shake of her head. He turned to the rest of the room. A deep, profound silence fell. "Sold." He slammed the gavel down, the crack echoing like a gunshot in the still tent. For $1.4 million, the marquee erupted in a thunder of applause. People were on their feet. My parents were hugging each other, their faces alight with sheer, incandescent triumph. My sister Chloe was clapping, her eyes wide with disbelief. It was in that moment of their absolute victory that the auctioneer held up his hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, an incredible moment, and I have been authorized to share one more surprise." He leaned into the microphone, a conspiratorial grin on his face. "The artist, the brilliant and elusive Illa, whose work has just shattered all our expectations, is in fact here with us tonight, and she has agreed to reveal herself." A new wave of murmurs and whispers swept the room. Heads turned, searching. My parents' smiles froze, their expressions shifting to ones of intense, curious anticipation. This was the final jewel in their crown. I felt Marcus's hand on my back, a small, steady pressure. Go, he whispered. My legs felt like lead, but I made them move. I started walking from the back of the tent, down the long aisle between the tables. People turned to look at the source of the movement, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. I kept my eyes fixed on the stage, on my painting. As I drew closer, my family saw me. My father's smile vanished, replaced by a deep, bewildered frown. My mother's hand went to her throat, her eyes widening in confusion. Chloe just stared, her mouth slightly agape. They thought I was coming to congratulate them, perhaps, or to cause a scene. They had no framework for what was about to happen. I reached the steps to the stage and walked up them, my simple black dress, a stark contrast to the shimmering opulence all around me. The auctioneer, seeing me approach, looked utterly baffled for a second, before a look of dawning comprehension spread across his face. He stepped back and handed me the microphone. I stood there for a moment, bathed in the warm spotlights, looking out at the sea of stunned faces. I looked at my parents, at their utter, world-altering confusion, and then I looked at my painting, my gilded cage, my weapon, my truth. I lifted the microphone. My voice, when it came out, was not the small, hesitant voice of Isabella the daughter. It was clear, it was calm, and it was steady. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Isabella Thorne, and I am Isla." The silence that followed was the most profound I have ever experienced. It was a physical entity, a thick blanket of pure shock that smothered the entire marquee. For a long, stretched-out second, nothing happened. Then, chaos erupted. A low murmur started at the front and rolled like a tidal wave to the back of the tent, growing into a roar of excited, disbelieving chatter. The few reporters present, who had been covering the social aspect of the event, suddenly smelled real news. Camera flashes began to fire, their strobing lights turning the scene into a surreal tableau. But I wasn't looking at the crowd. My eyes were locked on my family. My father's face had gone from confusion to a ghastly, ashen white. The color drained from his cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. My mother simply stared. Her perfectly manicured hand clapped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. And Chloe looked as if she had been struck. She stared at me, then at the painting, then back at me, the connections visibly, painfully clicking into place in her mind. The gold, the cold blue, the iron gates. It was our life, their life, dissected and laid bare for the world to see, and they had just sold it for a fortune. As I walked off the stage, the winning bidder's representative, the calm woman who had been on the phone, intercepted me. She had a warm smile and kind eyes. "Congratulations, Miss Thorne," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "My client, Mr. Al-Jamil, is an immense admirer of your work. He is beyond thrilled. He said to tell you he understood the painting's title perfectly." She handed me a card. "We'll be in touch to arrange the wire transfer tomorrow." Before I could reply, my family descended on me like vultures. My father grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, his face contorted with a rage so profound it was terrifying. "What is the meaning of this?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous, trying to keep the scene private in a room where everyone was watching them. "You did this to humiliate us, to make a mockery of this entire event." My mother was weeping, not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, gulping sobs of frustration. "How could you, Isabella?" she cried, her voice shrill. "This was for your sister. This was for her wedding. You've ruined everything." I looked from my father's furious face to my mother's tear-streaked one. For the first time in my life, I felt no fear, no shame, no need to apologize for my own existence. I pulled my arm from my father's grasp and stood up straight. The old Isabella would have crumpled. The new one looked him directly in the eye. A mockery. "I don't think so," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. "You told me to get a real job, one that pays. Well, I believe I just earned more in 10 minutes than your paralegal position pays in 20 years. This wasn't to humiliate you. This was for me. And as for the money, I let the words hang in the air for a beat. The contract you signed stipulates that all proceeds from the sale go directly to the artist. The Thorne Family Foundation and Chloe's wedding fund won't be seeing a penny. The finality of that statement hit them harder than the public revelation. The fury on my father's face was replaced by a look of sickening, dawning comprehension. The charity, their reputation, the money they had been counting on to finance their social standing, it was all gone. It had all been a mirage, and I was the one who had pulled back the curtain. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, exposed and stripped of their triumph under the harsh glare of the spotlights and the curious stares of their friends. I found a quiet spot outside, by the willow tree from my childhood, breathing in the cool night air. A moment later, a figure approached. It was Chloe. Her face was pale, and the earlier radiance had been extinguished, replaced by a look of raw, conflicted emotion. She stood before me, wrapping her arms around herself. "Izzy," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "the painting."
The colors, that blue.
"It's Mom's vase, isn't it?" I just nodded. She looked down at the grass. "I had no idea," she said, so quietly I could barely hear her. What we did to you. I was so caught up in all of this." She gestured vaguely back at the glowing marquee. "The wedding, the dresses, the parties. I didn't think. I'm sorry." It wasn't a perfect apology. It was hesitant, incomplete, born of shock. But it was the first honest thing she had said to me in years. It was a crack in the gilded cage that had separated us. I didn't forgive her. Not yet. The wound was too deep, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that one day, I might. The next few weeks were a blur. The story of the auction became a minor legend in the art world, and a major piece of gossip in my parents' social circle. Articles appeared online, with headlines like "The Anonymous Artist" and "The Ultimate Family Feud" and "Painter's Revenge." How Ila beat the system. My face, the face of Isabella Thorne, was suddenly in demand. Galleries that had sent me form rejection letters were now calling Marcus, who was still playing the role of my agent, begging for a meeting. The $1.4 million, minus the auction house commission, appeared in my bank account. The number was so large, so surreal, that I just stared at it for a full day, unable to process it. I used a small portion of it to move out of my cramped apartment and into a bright, airy loft with huge industrial windows, a proper studio. The rest of it sat there, a silent testament to my victory. I knew I didn't want to spend it on frivolous things. It was more than money. It was power. It was a tool. And I knew exactly what I wanted to build. About a month after the auction, I was having coffee with Marcus when I saw a for sale sign go up on a building I knew well. It was a beautiful, slightly dilapidated 2-story brick building directly across the street from the main entrance of my family's country club. It had been a bookstore for years, but it had recently closed down. An idea, fully formed and perfect, crystallized in my mind. Every time my parents or their friends drove through those gates for a round of golf or a game of bridge, they would have to look at it. 3 months later, after navigating a mountain of paperwork, the building was mine. The transformation began. I hired contractors to strip the interior back to its original brick and hardwood floors. We installed gallery-quality lighting and left the huge storefront windows clear and open. I didn't want it to be an intimidating, sterile white cube. I wanted it to be warm and inviting. On the frosted glass of the front door, in simple, elegant lettering, were the words "The Gilded Cage Gallery." It was a promise and a warning, a place where art born from struggle could break free. The gallery's mission was simple: to showcase the work of talented, emerging artists who, like me, had been overlooked and rejected by the traditional art establishment. The first exhibition featured 3 artists I'd found online, artists whose work was raw, powerful, and utterly authentic. One of them, a young woman who painted on reclaimed scrap metal, because she couldn't afford canvas, cried when she saw her work professionally lit and hung on the gallery wall. In that moment, I knew I had used Isla's money for the right purpose. My parents attempted to reach out. The calls started a week after the auction. My father's tone was no longer commanding. It was pleading, unnaturally gentle. He spoke of misunderstandings, of how proud he had always been of my artistic spirit. My mother sent long, rambling emails about the importance of family and forgiveness, never once acknowledging the cruelty of her actions. It was all a desperate, transparent attempt to reclaim me, now that I was no longer Isabella, the failure, but Isla, the success. I was polite but distant. I kept the conversations short. I didn't need their approval anymore. The validation I had craved for so long had been replaced by a quiet, solid sense of my own worth. The gallery's opening night was a huge success. The art world came, the press came, and so did the public. The space was packed, buzzing with energy and excitement. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd began to thin, Chloe appeared. She wasn't wearing a designer dress, just jeans and a simple sweater. She came alone. She walked through the exhibition slowly, looking at every piece with genuine interest. Then she found me. "It's incredible, Izzy," she said, her voice full of an emotion I realized was awe. "What you've built, what you've done for these artists." She looked me in the eye, and this time, there was no hesitation. "I was a coward," she said. "I stood by and I let it happen. I am so sorry. I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night. About them, about me, about everything." She paused. "I know I have no right to ask, but if you'd let me, I'd like to help. I could volunteer, sweep the floors, anything." In her eyes I saw the sister I had lost years ago. "Okay, Chloe," I said, and for the first time I felt the tight knot of anger in my chest begin to loosen. "You can start on Saturday." Looking back on it all now, standing in the middle of my bustling gallery, I realize my family gave me the greatest gift they ever could have. They underestimated me. They threw me out into the cold, and in doing so they forced me to build my own fire. They saw my passion as a weakness, but it turned out to be my greatest strength. I spent so many years painting in the shadows, desperate for a sliver of their light, their approval. But I learned that you can't wait for someone else to tell you that you are worthy. You have to be your own champion, your own patron, your own force of nature. My name is Isabella, and I am a painter, and my life is my own masterpiece. Thank you so much for joining me, and for listening to my story. The journey was painful, but it led me to a place of strength I never knew I had. I'd love to hear from you now. Have you ever had a moment in your life where being underestimated turned out to be your secret weapon? Share your story in the comments below, because every single one of our experiences matters. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and please subscribe to the channel and share this with anyone you think might need to hear it. Remember, your value is not determined by someone else's inability to see it. Thank you for being here. I wish you all the strength in the world to paint your own future.